We are talking about something about politics in Japan, because in Japan the political is means something special and not something universal in Japan culture. So Minako told me that if you say something like political emotion, it means you are committed to something special.
Yes.
And the emotion is not ordinary things most people have in everyday life. I just want to comment on it.
Can I add something? And I still can't get the idea of political emotion, because it seems to me that the word political already includes some kind of political and some kind of emotion. So in Japan, you're political means like you're strange or you're special, or like something already, some emotion is already embedded in that word political. So I can't get the meaning of political emotion.
Okay, but if you look on the board, I mean the example of patriotism.
Yeah.
If an education system's trying to encourage patriotism, part of what they're encouraging is a positive feeling towards the particular state. So that would be an obvious example of a political emotion, love of one's country.
Yes, and especially in Japan, being quiet, being non-political is a good way to maintain our life. So we don't have citizenship education in schools, not really. So let me say, well, okay, and I'll stop here.
Okay, but I want you to realize that most people in this country would not think what I've put in the talk today. They would say politics is what the politicians do.
Yeah.
Right? And we do political things when we go to vote. So obviously I'm extending it to a much broader concept. When feminists said the personal is the political, I think that's part of what I'm talking about. And when Socrates says our city is a city of words, he's not just talking about formal procedures for government. He's saying that everything we do creates our life together. The way we talk to one another, the things we talk about, the things we value. Of course, this is not what most people think of as politics, but I'm trying to resist the idea that politics is a confined part of our lives just to do with voting. So perhaps Japan's not so different from what you'd find here. But thank you anyway. Any more? Yoshi.
We have talked about the idea of bourgeois in relation bourgeois in relation to.
Oh, just a second. Bourgeois, like I wrote on the screen, or Bourdieu, the French philosopher. Bourgeois. I'm sorry, bourgeois. Yes.
In the the screen.
Yes.
I couldn't get the meaning of the idea. No, I couldn't get why you used that word. Yeah, I was wondering why you used you used that word in relation to the attitude of people who emphasize the positive side of feelings in citizenship education, and then your name, Maria. Sorry, Maria just explains that the word can be how to say that the what other word which can be used to explain the positive emphasis could be elitist.
I see.
Yes, and then that made me sense, and then we moved on to different issue.
Can I just say something about that before you go on? So it's a particular use of bourgeois. I mean, sometimes bourgeois just means something like middle class. But this particular use is one that Karl Marx uses as well. And it means something like comfortable and complacent. Do you understand? Comfortable and complacent. So in a sense, Rawls is in this position. And Rawls, to be fair to him, says that he's thinking about bourgeois societies like our own, like American society. So he's thinking about privileged countries. He's not thinking about Syria today, for example. He's thinking about privileged countries, and clearly those countries still have to make sense of their politics. So he's modest about it. He understands the limitation. But what I meant is that if you take the citizenship education of the Crick report, which I was describing to you, which kind of comes from that, then it assumes that we're in a country with a reliable police force, where electricity supply works, where we're probably not going to be invaded straight away, and so on. So it takes a lot of things for granted. People are not starving. People have enough to eat. So you can get things done here. It takes so much of that for granted, and then says, how shall we all live together happily? And it tends to suppress this uglier side to civilization, that it's come out of violence and that there's a repression of violence as well. Because not everybody is in this, even in London, not everybody is in this comfortable position. Okay? So it's complacent. That's the part of it. Can you translate complacent into Japanese, please? And Chinese, what's complacent? Okay. Okay. Good. Right. Okay, so pass on, please. Takwa?
We talked another point. I think it's very related to discussion.
Just a bit louder because we can't hear it in spite of the microphone.
Another point is that we talked about citizenship as different from romantic fixed idea of citizenship. For example, I mean romantic fixed idea in that we are the elite, so we have to make the nation more good, and so there is a you said the boxed idea, and so there are distinction between the elite people and, for example, non-celebrated people. But non-celebrated people, for example, suffered from hunger and
poor people, deprived people. Okay, yes.
And instead of such way of thinking, we have to see there are already people existing there, and there are relationship already, and which we may be unconscious of, but we have to be conscious of that relation, and that should be the start point of thinking about citizenship education.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I think Tako's point is closely related to Minako's opinion. Minako mentioned in Japan there are political people and non-political people, and the citizenship education is often related to political, and citizenship education try to make non-political people more political, I think. And this idea is in my idea from your lecture, liberalistic, liberalistic, and Rawls think our citizenship or relation start from blank paper or blank canvas, and we can put many. We have many idea or good disposition or good skills, and we can get it and make part of us. And the person who have many skills and disposition is a good citizen and a good political one. But in Japan, there are. But this idea is a very fixed idea of citizenship, and miss the point where already live together. And so the Greek idea of citizenship is have implication to rethink our state of citizenship.
To rethink our status.
Yeah.
Okay, so and it takes account of what is already there, the past. Okay, that we don't start from nowhere. We're already implicated in somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
And I was just thinking about what you said in terms of citizenship, and what means to be a good citizen that's somehow related to follow the law. And also your words about justice. Many things that are legal, sometimes they are not just.
Yeah.
And for example, the parliament, a few weeks ago, they approved to bombard Syria.
Yeah.
It was a legal action, but can we think it's just? About 50 years ago in this country, it was illegal to be a homosexual. You could be arrested, or you could even be put in a psychiatric hospital because it was considered a mental health issue. And I was just thinking into extend what you said, that you detach this word just about in terms of justice in related to law, because citizens, they are a good citizen should follow what the law says. And as you can grab from many examples, to be legal most of the times, or many of the times, may not mean just. So there is an ethical issue that can come up with that.
Okay. I didn't think I'd said that, but you're certainly right. Lots of citizenship education starts from the premise that we need to bring students up to fit in with the society as it is, given its existing laws. But I didn't want to say that. I said that citizenship education, I thought, should be committed to thinking about how we might live together better. And sometimes that might involve rebelling against the position, the country that you're in, even violent rebellion.
No, I'm not saying that you said that. I got the attention that you used the word just. And most of the times people use the legal. And when you said just, you to put into perspective to me, to think about what sometimes is legal may not be just.
That's right. So we can always say, we know what the law is because it's written down.
Yeah.
We can always say, is the law just? Yes.
Yeah.
And do you know what Socrates' position was on this? And it's an interesting one, because Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth, the young people, and eventually sentenced to death. And he could have gone away, he could have escaped. But he said no, because it's important that the law is sustained, even when the law is wrong. What I think he meant was not that the law shouldn't be challenged, but that you must maintain some common project. You must be committed to the world you're in. He would have seen going away from the country as being kind of losing the point, losing a commitment to life. Of course, they would think about things there differently than most of us would now. And that's why he accepts death. And I don't agree with that. I think you should, sometimes run away and make find meaning elsewhere, or even try to subvert your country through action elsewhere. But you said that very well anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a second point I want to raise is about the negatives that you pointed out. And I see that sometimes the media plays a very important part on portray these negatives in a negative example to be followed by citizens. Yeah. So, because you said that citizenship education is more related to what is positive in terms of citizenship. And I was thinking the task of education in terms of approaching these negative ways as well, because the media portrays as a very negative. Everything when you are fighting against something that you could be seen as a negative citizen. I think it was the Prime Minister who said a few weeks ago that who is against, I think that bombard Syria would be in the side of the terrorists. Yeah. So even for you to rebel and if you to give a kind of opinion about that may portray you as a negative citizen.
Sure.
So I was just thinking how education can break that up and and make us active citizens in that sense as well.
Okay.
I'm interested in the Plato the sentence. The city is the city of the world. Citizenship, education, and the citizenship contact with the city, the world of the city. I think maybe citizenship education contact with the city.
Okay. Yes.
If how we understand the city, this depend maybe effectively how to understand the citizenship education. I think in China, thinking about citizenship education divided two fields. The first is the citizenship education include the laws give the identity of the citizenship. The other especially focus on in the public life, such as someone on the road or go to the bank or supermarket, and they she or she should obey the rules, public rules. That's all. But today, I listened to your lecture. I think your thought is wide than the China.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. You contact with the political philosophy, I think, conflict between the race and so on.
Okay.
I think so.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I had a question similar with Nami about the use of the word bourgeois, and so I was trying to get some sense of whether you thought the problem was the abstractness of it or the complacency of it. I was hearing two different critiques of kind of roles, and maybe it's, of course, you're trying to dissolve these false dichotomies, but I wondered if you could talk about the relationship between abstractness and complacency, and I think they are connected.
Yes, yeah.
That would be...
I'm sorry, Con.
No.
I wouldn't want to equate them. They have different meanings, clearly, don't they? Abstractness and complacency. But I sometimes think that abstractness is the retreat of the complacent.
Yes.
So if you're being complacent, you can hide in abstractness. And I think that applies to quite a lot of our lives, really.
And that's where I thought you were going, so I appreciate the qualification.
Okay. There's also an aesthetic appeal to abstractness. Many people love to have things formally arranged so they can understand the rules. Or sometimes they like to have things put in tabulated form, in boxes, because it's tidier. And that's an aesthetic desire that's being satisfied there. But it's a retreat from the complexity of the world, I think. Anything else, Jeremy? Sorry.
Fascinating. Just a very quick question. So as I understand, you also want to extend the definition of political beyond just a very reductionist definition of the workings of government to all of life itself, in a sense. So I wondered what the importance of the word political is. Is it primarily a response to Rawls and to their use of the word political, and then you want to dissolve the lines that contains that discourse, or are you interested in, maybe I've missed where there's a line of the political in your view?
Yes, I know what I'm saying can sound very vague, perhaps, or unclear. And I think Rawls is a brilliant philosopher. I mean, he made a very important contribution in the work he produced, and it produced a very extensive secondary literature and strong reactions to it. So all of that's valuable, but my sense is that my criticism would be that it loses the substance of people's lives and the complexity of people's lives, as other people have said. And then when I start to think about where the political stops, or where the question of how I should live with others stops, I don't find I can draw a line, you see, and of course there are questions of degree. When you vote in an election, if there were a referendum about bombing Syria, that would be a very clear political decision. But I also think the personal is political, and whether I was bad-tempered at breakfast this morning also has something to do with how we live together, and that is the fundamental thing.
No, it's just earlier when you mentioned that sensation and emotion, I was thinking there wouldn't be any emotion without sensation, because it's like, for me, all our emotions come from the perception of the physical world. Even if you have a feeling of somebody, it's because it's something you perceive. It's not just in your mind. So for me, they can't be separated. They are one thing.
Okay. But surely there's a very big difference in range then, isn't there? I mean, if I touch something that's very hot, I take my hand away, then that's a very immediate sensation. Whereas I have an emotional response to the bombing in Syria, but I'm not sure it's closely connected with any sensation.
For me, it's like if you touch something really hot, then it's not just like a machine touched something really hot and then that reflected. You have an emotion with that hot feeling. And the bombing of Syria, you hear it, you see it. And that's still from your sensation. So it's like, how do you separate them?
I like the way you're arguing. Okay. I mean, that's very holistic. Yes, that's very interesting. Do other people agree with what Charles said?
I think some sort of emotion can come out from some sort of abstract conception, but I'm sorry, I can't give you some concrete example because that's all.
Can I suggest that I did, because I said that formal ways of reasoning, like Rawls, or say like doing mathematics, right? They have an aesthetic appeal. I use the word aesthetic, which is about feeling.
Yes.
So, and I think thought processes can have an aesthetic appeal. So if you read a detective story, then you wonder who did this, who did that. And there's a kind of sensuous fascination. Nothing like, it's not touching a hot plate, but there's something that thrills the mind. So, and it is aesthetic. So I would like to break down that division exactly as you said, but I thought I was already going too far. So thank you.
We talk another question about the Plato the sentence, the city is the city of the world. We talk how do we understand the words? Not maybe not only mean the language. Jimmy, he said maybe include the source meaning, and she thought "dao" translates Chinese "dao."
What does that mean?
We want to you explain how to understand the words, the city of the world, the words.
Okay.
That Dao is your Dao.
I see.
The one you read.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, so what I think about that is that when I said, or when Socrates says our city is a city of words, I think it doesn't just mean words as I'm speaking them now, it also includes gesture, for example. So what that means is, could be various things, or this, what does that mean? It can be various things, but this is the gesture of a human being that uses language. So a gesture occurs against this background of language, and the fantastic range of meaningfulness in human lives, in dance, for example, obviously in painting and music and so on, those are meanings generated by language beings. I think you cannot understand human beings without reference to language, through meaning making through signs. Okay? And then if you talk about thought, I understand it's a Tao, but if you talk about thought, I think we don't really have thoughts as human beings without language. So the change that happens to us when we're about 2, and we've started to understand what people are saying, and we begin to use words ourselves, that change is absolutely fundamental for becoming a human being, becoming an adult human being, say. And the difference between the 5-year-old and the 2-year-old is much, say 5 and 2, is much less than between the 2-year-old and the 6-month-old child. Because the 2-year-olds come into this language world, and the world itself is a language world. So Heidegger's way of putting this is that animals, they occupy the same space as us. Animals don't have a world, they have an environment or a habitat. So they respond to different cues in the environment, but they don't think of world in the way that we do. And our world is not a static thing, it's projective. It's becoming all the time. I think this is very complicated, I'm sorry, but so the Tao, if I've got it right, the Tao is that the world is on the way. You can't think world without thinking way, Tao. It's on the way all the time. Does that make sense, Jeremy? Yes? Yeah. Does anybody want to respond to that, or does it sound crazy, or? Okay, do you want to pass it over then?
I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but we'll see how it goes. Just with regards to the relationship that you mentioned between emotions and rationality, and you seem to sort of imply that emotions are something that can be reasoned with to a certain extent. So anger, for example, if we are shown to be wrong in our reasoning behind being angry, that our anger should dissipate. But I just wonder, to what extent is that always the case with emotions? Because I think sometimes, on the one hand, emotions can be very intuitive, and I think the example at the end of The Lives of Animals, where she has this sort of irrational sense of disgust, and I mean, there's not really a rationality behind. I mean, there is the rationality, but it's almost an irrational emotion that she has. It's quite, it's not something that you could reason with. And I think in the case of political emotions, especially, I just think of the example of Northern Ireland, for example, this sort of strong sense of nationalism that exists on both sides of the conflict. I think often that's a very irrational sort of political emotion. It's not something that can be reasoned with. It doesn't matter how much evidence they could be shown to the contrary. It's not going to dissipate that sort of political vigorous emotion that they have. So I'm just wondering, I mean, is there another category of emotions there? There's this sort of more rational sort of emotions, or would you include rational emotions?
That's a great comment. One way to look at this is, first of all, the kinds of emotions you have about members of your family. Because typically, if you've got brothers or sisters, there may be some element of rivalry, even hatred as a small child with the brother or sister. Perhaps as a big child as well. And of course that can be increased by looking at parent-child relationships as well. So incredibly strong feelings are there which go back to our beginnings. And I suppose in normal development, as Martha Nussbaum says in Radical Evil, in normal development you kind of learn to live with that, or you overcome it in some degree. And I know you don't always do that. And so as an adult, even though you're behaving in a very civilized way, you find you're doing things that are a bit unreasonable to your sister or your brother or your parent or whoever it is. So that stuff surfaces again and again. I don't imagine we ever get all this together. And your other example is brilliant, because the Northern Ireland situation is a kind of intractable situation. It's one that no one can see a straightforward resolution to. You'd say that, would you? Yeah. And the strong, very, very strong feelings, sometimes feelings that have shaped people's lives, have complex histories that go back centuries, right? Complex political histories. So whole lifetimes have been lived out through that conflict. And of course you can reason through this, you can understand it and describe it in the way I've just done. And you can attend to the detail of what's happened as well. But there's a sort of gut feeling, you know, something very deep that's almost impossible to overcome. And of course that's exactly what people try to do. Another example here would be the South Africa again. And are you aware, some of you will be, the Truth Commission? Yes, yeah. Truth and Reconciliation, yes. So Bishop Desmond Tutu organised this thing. I've got the title right, Truth and Reconciliation Commission or something like that. And he got people who had suffered from others, and he got the agents of the violence, the people who'd done the violence, usually white people and black people together, and let people tell their stories. And so it was like a court in a sense, but it wasn't a court that would come to any decision or any penalty or any judgment. The point was to create circumstances where people could articulate, they could say what had happened. So there was no question of removing the problem was there. But maybe saying what it was just a step forward. So the thing about people having a voice or being heard is very important with this. But fundamentally, I think you're really right about this, both at the family level, that we never quite undo these knots, these complexities in our early experience, and they stay with us. You're always messed up somehow. And also at the political level, and if you live in a comfortable bourgeois place like I do, then you know, it's easy not to be affected by this. But if you're in a very challenged place, like Northern Ireland, then you could hardly not be affected. You're inevitably affected by this.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of reiterate that, but I think the case, I mean, I can only really talk about Northern Ireland. It's the only thing that I have experience with.
She's not from Northern Ireland.
I'm not from Northern Ireland. Yeah. But I think it's become very much embedded in their sense of identity, and I think that's the sort of difference there. Yes. It's not a political emotion anymore. It's not a reaction to something. It's something that's very much part of who they are and how they consider themselves to be. So it's perhaps it can't really fall into the same category.
Yes. But oh, that's great. Thank you very much for that.
It was so fascinating, the distinction of the ethics and morality. And I just I thought about what I did for my master's research. I looked at ethnicity, identity and nationality, and I looked at political nation and cultural nation. So I thought it's like maybe what you're saying more what you're saying, like negative things, is maybe cultural nation. Maybe it's a big things, but and also I thought you said you want to look at you want to argue neglect of political negative emotion.
Yes,
yeah?
That's right. Yes.
And is that, I don't know if I can use the word of this, but is that like philosophy of karma or something?
Karma?
Karma.
No, I don't think so.
No?
You mean Indian karma? Do you?
Yes, something
Yes.
like that.
No, I don't think so at all.
No, okay.
So perhaps you've got the negatives around the wrong way. I think there's a problem with citizenship education. Yeah. So the top paragraph, that if you read books in the library here about citizenship education, they tend to emphasize citizenship skills, like listening to what other people say, a disposition to take seriously what other people say, toleration for views you don't agree with, that sort of thing. And I think this is very limited because of what I think Takuo or Kensuke said, that it doesn't take account of the background injustices and unfairnesses and anger and resentment that actually exists in people's lives. So the emotions are not just positive ones, there's a lot of bad feeling, and those bad feelings sometimes are justified, sometimes they're not. Very often they are justified, and that needs expression, it needs acknowledgement. Do you see what I mean? So it's not karma, it's disturbance, it's the opposite, I think. I want this to be uglier, more difficult than it is. This is too sweet a picture, too rosy a picture. Which is kind of why I showed the pictures at the end. And sometimes, you know, it's sometimes been said here when students go on protest movements, perhaps they imagine 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds, and they should be in school, but they deliberately don't go to school because they go to protest, perhaps against the bombing of Syria. That looks like good citizenship education to me. Do you see what I mean? It's good that they've done that. They are politically motivated. They've thought about it. They haven't just stayed comfortably in the classroom. Of course, the teachers typically don't like it, but perhaps that's a sign that there is really something developing. Okay, somebody else? Lauren, do you want to say?
Something I picked up on was, it's actually right up there, you said about toleration of difference. And I think you might teach on this course actually, the EVS, Education, Values and Society, on the BA.
Yes, I've not done it, but I know I know what it's about. Yes.
Well, there's one in the BA that I observed for part of my research, and we were talking about the concept of tolerance, and I think that people tend to think of that as like I guess in your list it would be considered a positive or superficial citizenship education thing, but tolerance, I think, like just tolerating someone is kind of is not really something that you should be teaching. You should be teaching more respect of someone else's views rather than tolerating them, I would say. But I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Okay, well, I've got something to say about both those things. Let's take respect first of all. I don't know if you were there, Lauren, but we had a Wednesday seminar a few weeks ago when Timothy Williamson from Oxford was talking, and he drew attention to a policy that Oxford University has recently adopted, and it's a policy along the following lines. The university is committed to the respect and appreciation of all cultures. The university is committed to respecting and appreciating all cultures. Now, it sounds like a very good sentiment, a good liberal sentiment, but it's not. You shouldn't tolerate and appreciate all cultures, because if you do that, you will tolerate and appreciate Nazi culture as well. You see? So just because it's a culture, just because it's a coherent way of life with certain values, and it's different from your own, it doesn't mean it's good. You know, sometimes whole ways of life can be corrupt in that way. So that the respect idea is complicated. Sometimes it is said that the more you understand another culture, or the more you understand somebody, the more you appreciate them. But that doesn't apply either, because sometimes the more you understand somebody, the worse they seem. Saddam Hussein, do you understand him? When you understand him better, do you think he's quite a nice guy, really? You know, you should see some things are very horrible, very bad. And toleration's a very, very interesting concept, because John Locke wrote about it, an essay on toleration in the 17th century, and that was a century of religious wars, Catholics and Protestants, in Europe. Many wars created around that, including ones involving Ireland, I think, at the time. But anyway, throughout Europe this was going on. The interesting thing about toleration is that it involves allowing or agreeing to something or permitting something that you don't like or don't approve of. So it's wrong to say you tolerate your friends. I mean, if you like your friends, you don't tolerate them. There's nothing to tolerate because you have the same interests and so on. I know they may have an irritating habit which you tolerate, but I mean, normally you don't tolerate your friends. So if you're anti-racist, you don't tolerate black people or white people or whatever the other colour is. You don't tolerate, because that sounds as though, oh, you're putting up with them, but you don't really like them. So toleration's not an issue when you're with other people and you like them, you get on with them. If you're in a happy marriage, you don't tolerate your husband, your wife, or whoever it is. Okay. Don't think about that one too much.
It just reinforces certain things. When I say that you have to tolerate and respect other cultures, it's because it's not integrated into your everyday life.
Yes.
Because if you did, you didn't need to reinforce what you must do towards that people that are not integrated into your life.
Well, of course, the broad principle behind that is the liberal principle. It's a good one, that yes, on the whole, we should do this. But it's a very lax wording, that thing at Oxford. And I want to press the point about toleration, because toleration has most significance when you're dealing with people who you disapprove of in some way. So the Northern Ireland case is very good from this point of view, that at its worst, one group would think the other group was evil in some sense. There was something very bad driving them. If you listen to Ian Paisley, the Protestant leader of 30 years ago, he thought that the Catholics were influenced by the devil, the opposite of God. You see what I mean? So clearly with that, the potential for conflict is enormous. And it's a step forward, I think, when he says, well, I really think they're wrong, they're profoundly wrong, but I'm not going to try and destroy them. I'm going to let them live and pursue their own ways. So you might think about Donald Trump, whether you'd tolerate Donald Trump or not. Let's not go there. Okay. Do you want to say any more, Lauren? Okay. Are we done? Anybody else?